Maya Whitehorse sat across from Jake in the colony mess hall drinking the terrible coffee and telling him about her life with a passion that made her eyes shine in the dim lighting. And she explained that she was the daughter of a tribal elder from the Mescalero Apache reservation in New Mexico, where she had learned traditional skills from her grandmother while also excelling in advanced sciences at university. She said her people had always been survivors and warriors who adapted to harsh environments for generations, and when humanity reached for the stars, the Apache had been among the first to volunteer for frontier settlements because they understood what it meant to thrive in places that tried to kill you every day. Maya spoke about how she felt caught between two worlds, growing up with one foot in ancient traditions and the other in cutting-edge technology. But instead of choosing one path, she had decided to embrace both and make them work together. Her specialty was studying how human cultures maintained their identity while adapting to alien environments, and she had chosen this particular colony because of its isolation and the diverse backgrounds of its inhabitants who came from all over Earth, bringing their own traditions and ways of thinking. Jake found himself fascinated by her story and the way she refused to apologize for who she was or where she came from, and he asked her again what she had been doing out beyond the barriers alone. Maya's expression became more serious, and she explained that over the past few weeks there had been reports of unusual activity near the abandoned mining sites, with equipment disappearing and strange energy signals that did not match anything in the colony's database, and she had wanted to investigate personally because she believed that understanding the unknown was more important than playing it safe. Jake told her that curiosity was fine, but stupidity would get her killed on a planet like this, and Maya smiled at his bluntness, saying she appreciated honesty more than empty politeness. He said that if she was going back out there to investigate, she would not be going alone, and Maya raised an eyebrow, asking if that was an order from the colony's unofficial protector. Jake replied that it was common sense and that two people had a better chance of surviving than one, especially when dealing with unknown threats. And Maya studied him for a long moment before nodding her acceptance of his offer. Over the next few days, they fell into an unlikely partnership, where Maya would spend her mornings conducting interviews with colonists and documenting their stories while Jake handled his maintenance duties, and in the afternoons they would venture out into the wilderness together, tracking the strange occurrences Maya had mentioned. They found evidence that something unusual was definitely happening, because equipment had not just disappeared randomly but had been systematically dismantled and removed with a precision that suggested intelligence and purpose, and there were tracks in the dust that did not match wolves or any other known creature on the planet. Jake examined the tracks carefully and told Maya that someone or something else was out here, and Maya pulled out her scanner, which showed technology signatures that were not appearing on the colony's sensors. She said this was sophisticated work, possibly involving stealth technology that was beyond what the colony possessed, and Jake felt a chill run down his spine, because unknown technology on a frontier world usually meant trouble. As they investigated together, Maya began to open up more about her personal life and the experiences that had shaped her, and she told Jake about growing up on the reservation where her grandmother had taught her to track animals and read the land, while her father had encouraged her scientific interests. She explained that her people had survived conquest and forced relocation and cultural suppression by holding on to what mattered while learning to use the tools of those who would destroy them, and that adaptability was in her blood. Jake listened and found himself admiring her strength and the way she had turned potential conflict between tradition and modernity into a source of power, and he told her that her people sounded remarkable. Maya smiled and said they were remarkable but also human, with all the flaws and struggles that came with being human. And then she turned the conversation back to him, asking what he was running from that had brought him to the edge of known space. Jake was quiet for a long time as they made camp under the alien stars that formed constellations, nothing like the ones he had grown up watching in Texas. And finally, he told her that he had served in Earth's military as part of a special operations unit that handled difficult situations on colony worlds. He said there had been a mission that went wrong in ways he still had nightmares about, and people he cared about had died because of decisions he had made. Maya listened without judgment or platitudes, and when he finished, she simply said that running from pain did not make someone a coward, but rather showed how much they had cared in the first place. She told him that she saw a man who had loved his friends enough that losing them had broken something inside, and that was not weakness, but rather proof of his humanity. Jake looked at this fierce woman who had walked into his life and somehow seen past all his defenses in just a few days. And he asked her if she had really meant what she said about him being hers now. Maya met his eyes and said that in her culture, bonds forged in crisis were sacred, and that she had come to trust him with more than just her safety. And yes, he was hers just as she was becoming his, whether either of them had planned it or not. They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the stars and thinking about how strange life could be, and Jake realized that for the first time in 5 years, he felt something other than guilt and loneliness. Maya moved closer to him and rested her head on his shoulder, and he put his arm around her, feeling the warmth of another human being after so long alone. She told him that they would figure out what was happening with the missing equipment and the strange signals, and they would do it together because that was how partnerships worked. Jake agreed and said that whatever they found out there, they would face it side by side. And Maya laughed softly, saying that was exactly what she expected from someone who was hers. As they packed up their camp the next morning and headed back toward the colony, Jake caught himself smiling for the first time in recent memory, and he thought that maybe the universe had sent him to this remote planet not to hide from his past, but to find a future he had not known he was looking for. The architect's forearms moved with fluid grace as it sat up in the stasis pod, and its eyes opened to reveal pupils that were vertical slits in pools of liquid silver that seemed to glow with their own light. The being looked at Jake and Maya for a long moment with an expression that was impossible to read on such an alien face, and then it spoke through a translation device attached to its throat that converted its musical language into words they could understand. It said its name was Keeper Valen of the Third Assembly, and asked how long it had slept, and Maya told it gently that nearly 12,000 years had passed since the architects had fallen. Valen's eyes closed briefly, and Jake could see genuine emotion crossing its features, and he realized this being was mourning the loss of everything it had known, including friends and family, and an entire civilization that existed now only in memory. Valen asked if they had heard the warning message, and Jake confirmed that they had learned about the weapon and the failing seal, and the Keeper seemed to assess them carefully before asking questions about human technology and capabilities to determine if their species was ready for the challenge. Ahead, over the next hour, they shared everything they knew about humanity's expansion into space and the colonies they had established on dozens of worlds, and Valen listened with an intensity that suggested it was making calculations about their chances of success. The Keeper explained that the weapon was called the Void Engine, and it had been designed to draw unlimited energy from the space between dimensions, but the architects had not understood the forces they were manipulating until it was too late. Valen told them the engine did not just draw energy, but drew attention from things that existed outside normal reality, and these entities were so alien that even the architects with all their knowledge could barely comprehend them. The beings hungered for matter and energy, and they had come through the crack in reality that the engine created, and the war that followed had been brief and devastating, with the architects fighting desperately to contain the catastrophe they had unleashed. Maya asked what happened if the seal failed before they could destroy the engine, and Valen's expression became grave as it explained that the entities would be released to spread across the galaxy like a plague, consuming worlds and leaving nothing but empty husks behind. Valen showed them more records from the ship's database, including images of the entities that hurt to look at because their shapes defied normal geometry, and Jake felt his stomach turn as he watched footage of the creatures moving through space in ways that should not be possible. The Keeper said destroying the Void Engine would not be simple, because the location where it was sealed was protected by automated defenses and remnants of the entities they had trapped, and any expedition would need ships and weapons capable of fighting things that existed partially outside reality. Maya was already making notes on her computer, and she asked Valen if it would be coming with them to help destroy the engine, and the Keeper's response was sad as it explained that the stasis pod had preserved its body, but could not stop decay entirely. Valen said it had perhaps a year left to live and maybe less, and while it could teach them everything they needed to know about the architects and the engine, it could not make the journey itself. Jake felt a surge of respect for this being that had sacrificed everything, including its own future, to leave a warning for species it would never meet, and he promised Valen that they would not let its sacrifice be meaningless. The Keeper moved into the colony, causing quite a stir among the inhabitants who had never seen an alien before, and the colony administrator tried to assert control over the situation, But Valen made it clear that it would work only with Jake and Maya. A message was sent to Earth authorities marked with the highest priority, and the response came within days authorizing a military expedition to deal with the threat. In the meantime, Valen began teaching Jake and Maya everything it could about architect technology and the nature of the entities they would face. And the Keeper's methods were intense, involving neural interfaces that transferred information directly into their minds. Maya went first, and Jake watched as she collapsed when the interface was removed, and he caught her as her body shook from the overload of data that had been poured into her consciousness. She gasped that it hurt, but that she understood now and could see how the void engine worked, at least in theory. And Jake underwent the same process, learning about weapons and defensive systems while also receiving fragments of Valen's memories. He saw the architect civilization at its height, with beautiful cities made of living crystal and gardens that floated in the air. And he also saw the horror of their fall with the desperate final days as they tried to contain what they had unleashed. The training continued for weeks, with Valen teaching them to use technology that responded to thought rather than physical controls, and they practiced in the ship's training chambers, fighting holographic projections of the entities. Valen explained that conventional weapons would not work because these beings existed across multiple planes of reality, and only phase weapons that could strike at multiple dimensional frequencies simultaneously had any effect. Jake and Maya sparred with the projections, learning to see patterns in movements and identifying which dimensional plane the entities were favoring at any moment. And it was exhausting work that pushed them to their limits, both mentally and physically. Through it all, the bond between Jake and Maya deepened as they spent evenings talking and sharing stories of their lives. And Jake finally told her about his time in Earth's military and the mission that went wrong and the friends he lost. He explained that he had come to this remote planet to escape the guilt, but it had followed him anyway. And Maya told him that running did not make him a coward, but showed how much he had cared about the people he lost. She said she saw a man who felt things deeply, and that was a strength, not a weakness. And Jake looked at this remarkable woman who had entered his life so unexpectedly, and asked if she had really meant what she said about him being hers. Maya smiled and said that bonds forged in crisis were sacred in her culture, and that she trusted him with more than her life now. And she said yes, he was hers just as she was his. They kissed under the alien stars, and it felt like coming home after a long journey, and their relationship became the talk of the colony, though neither of them cared what others thought. Even Valen seemed pleased in its alien way, and when Jake asked about architect relationships, the Keeper said that love was universal across species, and while they experienced it differently, the core was the same, involving connection and trust and willingness to sacrifice for another. As the weeks passed, Jake and Maya became proficient in architect technology and began to understand the theoretical basis for destroying the void engine. But they knew theory and practice were very different things. Valen told them they were as ready as it could make them, and that when the Earth ships arrived, they must convince the authorities to take the threat seriously and mount an expedition to the engine's location, because every day they delayed brought them closer to the seal's failure and the release of the entities that would end human civilization before it truly began. The military science vessel arrived exactly on schedule, and it was called the Frontier Explorer, and its captain was a stern woman named Linda Martinez, who listened to their briefing with obvious skepticism that gradually turned to alarm as she realized they were serious. Valen's presence made it impossible to dismiss the threat as fantasy, because an actual alien being standing in front of her was proof that something extraordinary was happening. But Captain Martinez clearly struggled with the scope of what they were proposing. She said they were asking for a deep space expedition to a location outside charted territory that could take months even with humanity's fastest ships, and she wanted to know why she should trust the warnings of a civilization that had destroyed itself. Valen replied calmly that the architects had destroyed themselves precisely because they ignored warnings and thought they were too advanced to fail, and the Keeper hoped that humanity would prove wiser than its predecessors. Captain Martinez turned to Jake and Maya and pointed out that they were not military personnel despite their training in alien technology, and she asked why she should believe they were capable of leading such a dangerous mission. Maya stepped forward, with fire in her eyes, and told the captain that they had been living this threat for 3 months, studying records and training and simulations, and learning everything Valen could teach them. and she said with respect that the captain's military did not understand what they were facing. Jake added that they were not asking the captain to take their word alone, but to bring scientists and tactical officers to examine the architect's ship and study the data and talk to Valen. And he said once her people understood the threat, they would reach the same conclusion. Captain Martinez agreed, and for the next 2 weeks the Frontier Explorers crew conducted intensive investigation of everything Jake and Maya had found, and the results sobered even the most skeptical officers. The head scientist named Gregory Park confirmed that the Void engine was real, and that its dimensional seal was decaying faster than the architects had predicted, and he told everyone at the briefing that humanity had been detecting strange anomalies for years, including energy readings and reports of ships disappearing in deep space. Dr. Park said he believed the engine's influence was already leaking through the failing seal, and that if they did not act, soon it might be too late to stop what was coming. The message sent to Earth was marked with the highest priority classification, and the response came within days, which meant the situation was being taken seriously at the very top levels of government. Earth Command authorized the mission and designated it Operation Vanguard, and they said a battle group of 5 ships would be assembled with a crew of 300 to make the journey to the engine's location. However, there was a complication because Earth Command wanted to send their own specialists and experienced military personnel to lead the mission, and Jake and Maya would be reduced to consultants who might not even be allowed on the combat teams. Maya argued that this was unacceptable because they had trained specifically for this mission, and Earth's people would not know how to use architect technology or understand the enemy they were facing, and Captain Martinez said she agreed but did not make policy decisions. Valen had been listening quietly to the discussion, and the Keeper spoke up saying that perhaps Earth Command should know the architect's ship would only respond to Jake Morrison and Maya Whitehorse, because it had keyed the systems to their neural patterns, and without them the expedition would be flying blind into unknown danger. It was a calculated gamble, but it worked because Earth Command relented and agreed to give Jake and Maya leadership roles in the mission, and they would serve as co-commanders of the strike team, working with military personnel but maintaining final authority on matters related to architect technology. The battle group assembled over the next month, with ships being equipped with experimental phase weapons designed based on architect principles, though inferior to the originals, and crews trained in simulators preparing for combat against an enemy, unlike anything humanity had faced. Valen's health continued to decline as the Keeper spent its remaining energy preparing final briefings and recording everything it knew about the Void engine and the entities, and Jake and Maya visited every day, forming a genuine friendship with the ancient being. One evening, Valen told them weakly that they had given it hope because the Keeper had thought it would die, knowing its people's legacy was only destruction. But Jake and Maya had shown that something good could come from the architect's mistakes. Maya promised that they would succeed in destroying the engine and saving both civilizations, and Valen smiled sadly, saying, "The architect's civilization was already gone, but perhaps its memory could live on through humanity." The Keeper died 3 days before the battle group was scheduled to depart, and they held a ceremony combining human traditions with what they knew of architect customs. Valen's body was placed in the ship it had protected for thousands of years, and Jake and Maya set the vessel to launch into the system's star, creating a funeral pyre bright enough to be seen across the entire colony. Jake whispered that they would not let Valen down as the ship vanished into the sun's corona, and the next morning they boarded the Frontier Explorer to begin the longest and most dangerous journey of their lives. The trip to the Void engine's location took 47 days of faster-than-light travel, pushing humanity's technology to its limits, and the battle group followed Valen's star charts through regions of space that had never been explored by humans. They passed through nebulae of exotic matter and skirted the edges of black holes, and each day took them further from everything they knew into the unknown darkness between stars. Jake and Maya used the travel time to drill the strike teams in architect combat techniques, and they had 30 soldiers who had been handpicked for their skills and adaptability. The teams practiced with phase weapons until they could use them instinctively, and they learned to identify the dimensional signatures of the entities they might face in battle. One young soldier named Peter Collins said he could not believe they were doing this and that it felt like something from a story, and Maya told him that all the best stories were rooted in truth, and this one did not have a guaranteed happy ending. They also spent time in the architect's ship, which had been brought along in the Frontier Explorer's cargo bay. and the vessel they had named Keeper's Legacy would serve as their primary assault vehicle, because its systems were far more advanced than anything human ships possessed. The battle group finally emerged from faster-than-light travel at the coordinates Valen had provided, and what they found defied easy description because the region appeared normal at first, but deeper scans revealed an anomaly. It was a wound in reality itself where the fabric of space and time had been stitched together with technology that should not exist, and the architects had created a dimensional prison by folding space around the void engine and the entities it had summoned. But the prison was failing with cracks forming in the dimensional barriers, and through those cracks things were leaking out into normal space. Dr. Park whispered that the energy signatures were off the charts, and that it was like staring into the heart of creation itself. And Captain Martinez ordered all ships to battle stations before telling Jake and Maya they were cleared to launch when ready. The red dust swirled across the mining colony on planet Kepler 442b as Jake Morrison climbed down from the solar panel array he had just finished repairing, and the twin suns were setting behind the distant mountains, casting long purple shadows across the barren landscape, where 47 colonists tried to make a living, extracting rare minerals from the harsh soil. Jake had been on this planet for 5 years now after leaving Earth to escape memories he would rather forget, and he had found a kind of peace in the isolation, working as the colony's maintenance chief and occasional scout, when someone needed to venture beyond the protective barriers. The wildlife here was dangerous, especially the creatures the colonists called wolves, though they looked nothing like Earth wolves with their 6 legs and teeth made of crystalline material that could tear through metal plating, and these predators hunted in packs using intelligence that made them far more deadly than simple animals. Jake checked his modified plasma rifle that he had designed to look like an old Winchester, because some habits from his Texas upbringing never died, and he preferred the familiar weight and feel of something that reminded him of home even if it fired superheated energy instead of bullets. The sky was darkening quickly, as it always did on this planet when Jake spotted movement through his binoculars near the abandoned mining shaft 3 kilometers to the south, and he could make out a figure running alone across the open ground, which was essentially suicide once the wolves came out to hunt at night. He grabbed his gear without hesitation and mounted his hoverbike that he had modified to look and sound like an old motorcycle, because he liked the rumble and the sense of connection to the machine, and within minutes he was racing across the plains with wind whipping his face as the distance closed between him and whoever was foolish enough to be outside the barriers alone. As he got closer, he could see it was a woman with dark hair and bronze skin stumbling over the rough terrain, and behind her a pack of 6 wolves was gaining ground with their crystalline teeth glinting in the last rays of sunlight. Jake pushed the bike harder and raised his rifle, firing 3 quick shots that dropped 2 of the beasts, while the others scattered momentarily, confused by the unexpected attack, and he skidded to a halt beside the woman, offering his hand, without a word, because there was no time for introductions when death was seconds away. She looked up at him with fierce brown eyes that showed no fear, only calculation and acceptance, and she took his hand with a grip that was surprisingly strong as he pulled her onto the bike behind him. The remaining wolves were already regrouping and starting their pursuit again, and Jake gunned the engine, racing back toward the colony with the woman's arms wrapped tightly around his waist. The wolves followed for nearly a kilometer, before finally giving up the chase, probably deciding that easier prey would come along eventually. And when they finally reached the safety of the outer perimeter, Jake helped the woman off the bike. She stood tall and brushed the dust from her clothes with a dignity that impressed him, considering she had just nearly been torn apart by alien predators. And when she looked at him again, there was something different in her expression, something that made him slightly uncomfortable, in a way he could not quite identify. She extended her hand formally and said her name was Maya Whitehorse, and that she had arrived 3 weeks ago as part of an anthropological survey team studying how human cultures adapted to frontier conditions. And then she said something that made Jake blink in confusion, because he thought he must have misheard her words. She told him that, according to her people's traditions, he had saved her life, which meant he was hers now, and she said it with a smile that was both amused and completely serious. Jake asked her to repeat what she had just said, because surely he had not understood correctly, and Maya explained that where she came from, a life debt was not taken lightly, and that by saving her, he had created a bond that could not be easily dismissed. Jake did not know what to say to that, because he had simply done what anyone would do when they saw someone in danger, and he certainly had not expected to suddenly belong to someone because of it. Maya seemed to find his confusion entertaining, and she told him not to worry too much about it right now, but that they would be spending a lot of time together from this point forward. And something in the way she said it made Jake realize that this woman was going to change his life whether he was ready for it or not. They walked together toward the colony's main building where Maya said she was staying in the research quarters, and she explained that she had been out investigating reports of unusual activity near the old mining sites when the wolf pack had surprised her. Jake told her bluntly that going out alone like that was foolish and that this planet did not forgive mistakes, and Maya replied that she could take care of herself and had survived worse conditions but admitted that she had underestimated the size of the pack. He offered to show her around the colony properly and maybe give her some advice about staying alive on Kepler 442b, and Maya accepted with a smile that made something warm stir in Jake's chest, despite his best efforts to remain detached. As they entered the mess hall and got coffee that tasted like recycled engine oil, Jake found himself thinking that maybe isolation was not what he needed anymore, and that perhaps this fierce Apache woman with her strange traditions and fearless eyes was exactly what the universe had sent him, even if he had not known he was looking for anything at all. And for the first time in 5 years he felt something other than the comfortable numbness he had wrapped around himself, like a protective shield against the pain of remembering everything he had lost back on Earth. The breakthrough in their investigation came on their 5th expedition into the wilderness, when Jake and Maya ventured further than they had gone before, following electromagnetic signatures that Maya's scanner had detected, and they reached a canyon system that the colony maps listed as unexplored because it was supposedly too unstable for mining operations. As they descended into the canyon, it became clear that someone had been here recently because there were fresh excavation marks on the walls and, more importantly, a concealed entrance to what looked like a cave system hidden behind carefully arranged rocks. Maya's scanner went wild with readings, and she told Jake excitedly that there was a massive power signature coming from inside the cave, and Jake checked his rifle and activated his helmet light, telling her to stay close because anyone who went to this much trouble to hide something would not be happy about them finding it. They entered the cave, which quickly revealed itself to be far more than a natural formation because the walls were smooth and almost polished with strange markings that neither of them recognized, and the passages led deeper into the planet's crust, with the temperature rising as they descended. After 30 minutes of careful exploration, they emerged into a vast underground chamber, and what they found took their breath away, because sitting in the center of the chamber was a ship unlike anything in the colony's database. The design was sleek and organic, with curves that suggested it had been grown rather than built, and the hull shimmered with colors that seemed to shift when observed directly, while symbols covered its surface in patterns that hurt to look at for too long. Maya whispered that this was not human technology, and that they might be looking at evidence of alien civilization, and Jake felt his heart racing because, first, contact protocols were clear about reporting immediately to Earth authorities, but something told him they needed to understand what they had found before bringing in others who might not handle it carefully. Maya approached the ship with her scanner, recording everything, while Jake kept watch for any signs of danger, and she told him that the ship was generating some kind of dampening field that explained why the colony sensors had never detected it. She said the ship was old based on decay patterns in the hull material, and her best estimate was that it had been here for at least 10,000 years, just sitting in this chamber waiting to be discovered. They circled the ship looking for an entrance and found what appeared to be a doorway sealed tight, and Maya's technical expertise proved invaluable as she interfaced her portable computer with the ship's systems, running algorithms that would have impressed any expert. She worked for 20 minutes before announcing that she had broken through the security, and she said the interesting thing was that the security seemed designed not to keep people out, but rather to wait for someone smart enough to get in. The door opened with a hiss of escaping gas that had been sealed inside for millennia, and the interior of the ship was pristine, as if time had no meaning within its walls, with soft bioluminescent lighting that activated as they entered. The corridors were lined with what looked like data storage systems, and they followed the main passage to what had to be the bridge at the heart of the ship. In the center of a circular chamber they found a stasis pod, and through the transparent cover they could see a figure that was humanoid, but clearly not human, with elongated features and silver skin, and 4 arms folded across its chest. Jake asked if the being was alive, and Maya checked her scanner, before gasping and saying that it was in suspended animation with life signs present but minimal, and this being had been asleep here for thousands of years. Before they could discuss what to do next, the chamber suddenly lit up with holographic displays appearing around them, showing star charts and mathematical equations, and what appeared to be historical records. And a voice filled the chamber, speaking in a language that was musical and completely incomprehensible. The ship's system seemed to recognize their confusion, because the language began to cycle through thousands of variations until it finally settled on English. And the voice said greetings to the inheritors and explained that if they were hearing this message, it meant one civilization had fallen and a new species had risen to sentience. The voice identified itself as belonging to the architects and said they were leaving this gift for whoever came after them. And the holographic display began showing images of a vast galactic civilization with billions of beings spread across thousands of worlds. Jake and Maya watched in amazement as the architects told their story about how they had been master engineers who built structures that defied physics and created technology that seemed like magic. But they had made a terrible mistake by becoming too proud and thinking they could control forces beyond their understanding. The display showed images of destruction on a scale that was hard to comprehend, with entire star systems collapsing and planets being torn apart, and space itself seeming to fracture and break. And the voice explained that the architects had created a weapon that destroyed them by tearing their civilization apart in a matter of days. Only a few had survived long enough to leave warnings for future civilizations, and the voice said the weapon still existed because they could not destroy it, but only seal it away in a dimensional prison between normal space and something else. The voice warned that the seal would not last forever, and their calculations suggested it would fail approximately 12,000 years after their fall, and Maya quickly checked the timeline against her scanner before her face went pale. She told Jake that according to the data, the architects had fallen 11,800 years ago, which meant the seal containing their weapon would fail in the next 200 years. And the voice confirmed this by showing a map with a location marked in glowing symbols. The voice said this was where they had imprisoned the weapon, and that whoever found this message must finish what the architects could not by destroying the weapon before it awakened, or else the new civilization would suffer the same fate. The chamber fell silent as the recording ended, leaving Jake and Maya standing in the darkness trying to process what they had just learned. And Jake said they needed to report this immediately because it was beyond anything they could handle alone. Maya was staring at the stasis pod, and she told him that the being inside was not dead but waiting. And she believed this was one of the architects preserved here to help whoever found the message. Jake asked if they could wake it up, and Maya admitted she did not know but thought they had to try because this being might be their only source of information about how to destroy the weapon, and they spent the next 2 days studying the ship's systems before attempting anything. The decision to wake the architect was not made lightly, because they also had to choose whether to inform the colony leadership or keep this discovery secret until they knew more. And in the end, they chose secrecy because the colony administrator was a bureaucrat who would quarantine the site and wait months for Earth authorities while the clock was ticking on a threat to all humanity. Maya worked tirelessly to decode the stasis pod controls using her knowledge of human suspended animation technology, and finding surprising similarities in the architect systems. And on the third day, she told Jake that she thought she could trigger the awakening sequence safely. Jake stood beside her with his rifle ready, not knowing what to expect when the alien woke up, and Maya pressed the final sequence of symbols that brought the pod humming to life with the fluid inside, draining away as the transparent cover slowly opened to reveal the architect stirring after thousands of years of sleep. The journey home took 53 days, which was longer than the outward trip, because they stopped to map the region and ensure no remnants of the void engine remained that could threaten humanity in the future. And scientists studied the data they had collected with amazement at what they were learning about dimensional physics and the nature of reality itself. Jake and Maya spent much of the return voyage recovering from the ordeal and planning for a future they had not been certain they would live to see, and the experience had changed them in ways they were only beginning to understand. The neural training that Valen had given them had left permanent impressions in their minds, and they carried fragments of architect knowledge that they were still processing and trying to make sense of in human terms. When they finally reached Earth orbit, they were greeted as heroes because the world governments had released the full story of Operation Vanguard. and humanity now understood how close they had come to extinction at the hands of entities. From beyond normal reality, Jake and Maya were awarded every honor their respective nations could bestow, including medals and titles and invitations to speak at the United Nations, and they were asked to address scientific councils and military academies about their experiences. But they declined most of the attention because they had never wanted fame and had only done what was necessary to protect the species they belonged to. And Jake told reporters that the real hero was Keeper Valen, who had sacrificed everything to leave a warning for people it would never meet. Instead of staying on Earth for the celebrations, they returned to Kepler 442b and the colony that had become their home. And the architect ship remained in orbit as a gift from a dead civilization and a reminder of what they had accomplished together. Earth authorities naturally wanted to study the vessel and unlock its secrets, but Jake and Maya had legal claim to it because they had been the ones to discover it, and they were not ready to give up something that represented their connection to Valen and the architects. Maya asked Jake one evening what they should do now, that the immediate threat was over, and they had saved humanity from extinction, and Jake said they should live and explore and remember, because that was what Valen would have wanted. They established the Valen Institute as a research center dedicated to studying architect technology and preparing humanity for whatever other threats might be waiting in the galaxy. And young scientists and soldiers came to learn from them about the advanced systems and combat techniques they had mastered. Gordon Hayes, who was the colony administrator, offered them positions as co-directors of expansion operations, and they accepted because they could use their fame to secure funding for new colonies and exploration missions. Humanity was entering a new era, where they understood they were not alone in the universe, and they had responsibilities beyond their own survival to honor the memory of species that had come before. Peter Collins and several other members of the strike team chose to stay on Kepler 442b, and they formed the core of what would become humanity's first deep space, rapid response force ready to deploy if another threat like the Void engine ever emerged. The young soldiers trained constantly using the architect ship's facilities, and they took their responsibility seriously, because they had seen firsthand what could happen when civilizations grew too arrogant or ignored warnings about forces beyond their control. But there was personal happiness alongside the professional accomplishments, and Jake and Maya were married in a ceremony that combined Apache traditions with the few architect customs that Valen had shared with them before dying. They spoke their vows under alien stars, promising to face whatever the future held together, and their friends from the colony and the military attended to celebrate the union of two people who had saved the world and found love in the process. Years passed with the colony growing larger and more prosperous, while humanity spread further into the galaxy, discovering new worlds to settle, and they encountered other alien species, with some being friendly and others cautious and a few openly hostile. But none of the species they met posed the existential threat that the Void engine had represented, and humanity was better prepared now to handle whatever challenges came their way, because of the knowledge the architects had left behind. Jake and Maya had children, including twins they named Valen and Hope in honor of the Keeper and what they represented, and they raised their children to honor both human heritage and the legacy of the architects by teaching them that every civilization has a responsibility to those that come after. The twins grew up learning to use architect technology and understanding the history of Operation Vanguard, and they carried the weight of their parents' accomplishments with grace and determination to make their own contributions to humanity's future. On the 10th anniversary of Operation Vanguard, they held a memorial service for Keeper Valen with representatives from across human space attending, and emissaries from the new alien allies humanity had made came to pay their respects to the being who had saved them all. Together they unveiled a monument in the canyon where Jake and Maya had first discovered the architect ship, and the inscription read that it was in memory of Keeper Valen and the architects who gave humanity the tools to save themselves. The inscription continued, saying that they hoped to honor the sacrifice by becoming worthy of the trust the architects had placed in species they would never meet. And everyone who stood at the monument understood the weight of that responsibility. That night, as they returned to their home, Maya turned to Jake with a smile and asked if he remembered what she had said when he saved her from the wolves all those years ago. And Jake replied that she had said he was hers now. Maya told him she had meant every word of that statement, and that through everything they had faced, including danger and triumph and the end of worlds and the birth of hope. He had been hers just as she had been his. Jake kissed her and said always because that was the only word that mattered when describing their bond. And Maya laughed, saying that was exactly what she expected from someone who belonged to her. Above them, the stars shone bright and full of possibilities, and humanity had passed its first great test by proving they could rise above limitations and face the unknown with courage. The legacy of the architects lived on not in ruins or warnings, but in the hearts of people who had learned from their mistakes. And somewhere in the space between dimensions, perhaps Keeper Valen smiled, knowing that its species' last gift to the universe had been hope itself. The cowboy and the Apache girl had saved each other in ways that went beyond that first encounter with the wolves, and in doing so they had saved everyone by showing that love and courage and determination could overcome even the darkest threats. Jake sometimes thought back to the man he had been when he first came to Kepler 442b running from pain and guilt, and he marveled at how much had changed because of one woman who had walked into his life and declared he was hers. Maya would say that fate had brought them together at exactly the right moment, and Jake agreed because he could not imagine any other path that would have led to the life they had built together. Their children would carry on the work they had started, and future generations would remember the day humanity faced extinction and chose to fight back with everything they had. And at the center of that story would always be the cowboy who saved a woman from wolves and the Apache girl who told him he was hers now and forever. 20 years after Operation Vanguard, the galaxy had changed in ways that would have seemed impossible to the people who lived before first contact with the architects, and humanity had grown from a single species struggling to establish colonies to a major player in galactic politics, with alliances spanning dozens of worlds. The Valen Institute had expanded beyond its original mission of studying architect technology to become a center for diplomatic training and cultural exchange, and representatives from 7 different alien species now studied there alongside humans, learning about cooperation and mutual defense. Jake Morrison had gray in his hair now and lines around his eyes from years of smiling, and Maya Whitehorse moved with the same fierce grace she had possessed as a young woman, though she joked that her joints complained more on cold mornings. Their children Valen and Hope had grown into remarkable adults, with Valen joining the Deep Space Exploration Corps and Hope becoming a xenobiologist studying how different species adapted to frontier conditions just as her mother had done decades before. The colony on Kepler 442b had transformed from a struggling mining outpost into a thriving city with a population of 12,000, and it served as the headquarters for humanity's frontier defense network, coordinating rapid response teams across multiple sectors. Peter Collins, who was no longer the young, nervous soldier, but a seasoned commander, now led those teams, and he credited Jake and Maya with teaching him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. The Keeper's legacy still hung in orbit above the planet, maintained lovingly by a crew who understood they were preserving not just a ship, but a piece of history, and occasionally Jake and Maya would take the vessel out for flights among the stars, remembering their friend Valen and the civilization that had tried to save the future. They had discovered that the architect ship contained more than just warnings and weapons, because Valen had filled its databases with art and music and literature from a culture that spanned millions of years, and Maya had made it her mission to share these treasures with humanity, so the architects would be remembered for more than just their mistakes. Earth had established the Galactic Heritage Council to preserve knowledge from extinct civilizations, and Maya served as its director, traveling between worlds to document the remnants of species that had risen and fallen long before humanity evolved. She had discovered evidence of at least 15 advanced civilizations that had existed in the galaxy over the past billion years, and each had left behind fragments of their existence for future species to find. Some had been destroyed by natural disasters and others by wars, but a few, like the architects, had fallen because they reached too far and disturbed forces they could not control. Maya told students that the common thread among all successful civilizations was humility, combined with curiosity, and she said those who thought they knew everything were doomed to discover they knew nothing when it truly mattered. Jake had taken a different path by focusing on training the next generation of explorers and soldiers, and he taught them that technology alone would never be enough to overcome the challenges they would face in the darkness between stars. He said that what mattered most was the bonds between people and the willingness to sacrifice for something larger than yourself. And he used examples from Operation Vanguard to illustrate how teamwork and trust had made the impossible possible. The twins would sometimes attend their parents' lectures, and they would see how Jake and Maya complemented each other, with one providing tactical expertise and the other cultural context. And Hope once told her brother that their parents were living proof that love could be a source of strength rather than weakness. Valen agreed and said he hoped to find someone who challenged and supported him the way their parents did for each other. And Hope laughed, saying that was a high standard to meet but worth striving for. The memorial to Keeper Valen had become a pilgrimage site, with people coming from across human space to pay respects to the being who had saved them all. And alien visitors often stopped there as well, because the architect's story resonated across species as a warning about hubris and a testament to the possibility of redemption. Jake and Maya would visit the monument regularly, especially on the anniversary of Valen's death, and they would stand in silence, remembering the conversations they had shared with the ancient being and the friendship that had formed despite the vast differences between their species. Maya said once that she believed Valen had chosen them specifically because the Keeper saw something in their hearts that reminded it of the best qualities of the architects before they fell. And Jake replied that he hoped they had lived up to that faith. The galaxy continued to reveal its mysteries, with new discoveries happening regularly, and humanity encountered phenomena that challenged their understanding of physics and biology and consciousness itself. But they approached each mystery with the caution that Valen had taught them, understanding that some doors should not be opened, and some knowledge came with prices too high to pay. And this wisdom had saved them from disasters that might have rivaled the Void engine in their destructive potential. One evening, as Jake and Maya sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and orange, their granddaughter ran up asking them to tell the story of how they met. Maya smiled and began the tale of how her grandfather had saved her from wolves, and how she had told him he was hers. And the little girl asked if that meant love at first sight. Jake laughed and said it was more like recognition at first sight, because they had each seen in the other someone who could walk beside them through whatever challenges life presented. And Maya added that love grew from shared experiences and mutual respect, and the decision to keep choosing each other every single day. The granddaughter seemed satisfied with this answer and ran off to play, and Jake took Maya's hand, saying that he would choose her every day for the rest of his life and beyond if such things were possible. Maya told him that their story had become legend, with young people across the galaxy talking about the cowboy and the Apache girl who saved civilization. But she said the real story was simpler and more profound than any legend. She explained that it was about two damaged people who found each other at exactly the right moment and helped each other become more than they could have been alone. And Jake agreed, saying that was the truth that mattered more than any dramatic version of events. They sat together as the stars began to appear, watching the same sky where the Void engine had once threatened to tear reality apart, and they knew that their journey from that first meeting to this moment had been worth every struggle and sacrifice. The legacy they were leaving was not just in the institutions they had built or the technologies they had mastered, but in the example they had set of what humans could accomplish when they combined courage with compassion and strength with wisdom. Their story would be told for generations as inspiration for those who faced impossible odds, and children across human space would grow up knowing that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they refused to give up. Jake and Maya understood that their time was limited because no one lived forever, but they also knew that what they had built would continue long after they were gone. The Valen Institute would keep training new generations. The Galactic Heritage Council would preserve the memories of fallen civilizations, and the deep space response teams would stand ready to face whatever threats emerged from the darkness. Most importantly, their children and grandchildren would carry forward the values they had learned from Keeper Valen about responsibility and humility, and the obligation that every species had to leave the universe better than they found it. As night fell completely and the alien constellations blazed overhead, Maya rested her head on Jake's shoulder and said that she had no regrets about any part of their journey together. Jake kissed the top of her head and replied that saving her from those wolves had been the best decision he ever made, and Maya laughed, saying that claiming him as hers had been equally good judgment on her part. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the colony around them, and feeling grateful for the life they had shared. And they knew that when their story finally ended, It would be with the knowledge that they had made a difference not just for humanity, but for the entire galaxy. The cowboy and the Apache girl had found each other against impossible odds, and together, they had shown that love and courage could overcome any obstacle, and that legacy would shine like a beacon for all the civilizations yet to come, teaching them that hope was always worth fighting for, no matter how dark the night became. The military science vessel arrived exactly on schedule, and it was called the Frontier Explorer. And its captain was a stern woman named Linda Martinez, who listened to their briefing with obvious skepticism that gradually turned to alarm as she realized they were serious. Valen's presence made it impossible to dismiss the threat as fantasy, because an actual alien being standing in front of her was proof that something extraordinary was happening. But Captain Martinez clearly struggled with the scope of what they were proposing. She said they were asking for a deep space expedition to a location outside charted territory that could take months even with humanity's fastest ships, and she wanted to know why she should trust the warnings of a civilization that had destroyed itself. Valen replied calmly that the architects had destroyed themselves precisely because they ignored warnings and thought they were too advanced to fail, and the Keeper hoped that humanity would prove wiser than its predecessors. Captain Martinez turned to Jake and Maya and pointed out that they were not military personnel despite their training in alien technology, and she asked why she should believe they were capable of leading such a dangerous mission. Maya stepped forward, with fire in her eyes, and told the captain that they had been living this threat for 3 months, studying records and training and simulations, and learning everything Valen could teach them. And she said with respect that the captain's military did not understand what they were facing. Jake added that they were not asking the captain to take their word alone, but to bring scientists and tactical officers to examine the architect's ship and study the data and talk to Valen. And he said once her people understood the threat, they would reach the same conclusion. Captain Martinez agreed, and for the next 2 weeks, the Frontier Explorer's crew conducted intensive investigation of everything Jake and Maya had found, and the results sobered even the most skeptical officers. The head scientist named Gregory Park confirmed that the Void engine was real, and that its dimensional seal was decaying faster than the architects had predicted, and he told everyone at the briefing that humanity had been detecting strange anomalies for years, including energy readings and reports of ships disappearing in deep space. Dr. Park said he believed the engine's influence was already leaking through the failing seal, and that if they did not act, soon it might be too late to stop what was coming. The message sent to Earth was marked with the highest priority classification, and the response came within days, which meant the situation was being taken seriously at the very top levels of government. Earth Command authorized the mission and designated it Operation Vanguard, and they said a battle group of 5 ships would be assembled with a crew of 300 to make the journey to the engine's location. However, there was a complication because Earth Command wanted to send their own specialists and experienced military personnel to lead the mission, and Jake and Maya would be reduced to consultants who might not even be allowed on the combat teams. Maya argued that this was unacceptable because they had trained specifically for this mission, and Earth's people would not know how to use architect technology or understand the enemy they were facing, and Captain Martinez said she agreed, but did not make policy decisions. Valen had been listening quietly to the discussion, and the Keeper spoke up, saying that perhaps Earth Command should know the architect's ship would only respond to Jake Morrison and Maya Whitehorse, because it had keyed the systems to their neural patterns, and without them the expedition would be flying blind into unknown danger. It was a calculated gamble, but it worked because Earth Command relented and agreed to give Jake and Maya leadership roles in the mission, and they would serve as co-commanders of the strike team, working with military personnel, but maintaining final authority on matters related to architect technology. The battle group assembled over the next month, with ships being equipped with experimental phase weapons designed based on architect principles, though inferior to the originals, and crews trained in simulators preparing for combat against an enemy unlike anything humanity had faced. Valen's health continued to decline as the Keeper spent its remaining energy preparing final briefings and recording everything it knew about the Void engine and the entities, and Jake and Maya visited every day, forming a genuine friendship with the ancient being. One evening, Valen told them weakly that they had given it hope because the Keeper had thought it would die, knowing its people's legacy was only destruction. But Jake and Maya had shown that something good could come from the architect's mistakes. Maya promised that they would succeed in destroying the engine and saving both civilizations. And Valen smiled sadly, saying the architect civilization was already gone, but perhaps its memory could live on through humanity. The keeper died 3 days before the battle group was scheduled to depart, and they held a ceremony combining human traditions with what they knew of architect customs. Valen's body was placed in the ship it had protected for thousands of years, and Jake and Maya set the vessel to launch into the system's star, creating a funeral pyre bright enough to be seen across the entire colony. Jake whispered that they would not let Valen down as the ship vanished into the sun's corona, and the next morning they boarded the Frontier Explorer to begin the longest and most dangerous journey of their lives. The trip to the Void Engine's location took 47 days of faster-than-light travel, pushing humanity's technology to its limits, and the battle group followed Valen's star charts through regions of space that had never been explored by humans. They passed through nebulae of exotic matter and skirted the edges of black holes, and each day took them further from everything they knew into the unknown darkness between stars. Jake and Maya used the travel time to drill the strike teams in architect combat techniques, and they had 30 soldiers who had been handpicked for their skills and adaptability. The teams practiced with phase weapons until they could use them instinctively, and they learned to identify the dimensional signatures of the entities they might face in battle. One young soldier named Peter Collins said he could not believe they were doing this and that it felt like something from a story, and Maya told him that all the best stories were rooted in truth, and this one did not have a guaranteed happy ending. They also spent time in the architect ship, which had been brought along in the Frontier Explorer's cargo bay, and the vessel they had named Keeper's Legacy would serve as their primary assault vehicle because its systems were far more advanced than anything human ships possessed. The battle group finally emerged from faster-than-light travel at the coordinates Valen had provided, and what they found defied easy description, because the region appeared normal at first, but deeper scans revealed an anomaly. It was a wound in reality itself, where the fabric of space and time had been stitched together with technology that should not exist, and the architects had created a dimensional prison by folding space around the Void Engine and the entities it had summoned. But the prison was failing, with cracks forming in the dimensional barriers, and through those cracks things were leaking out into normal space. Dr. Park whispered that the energy signatures were off the charts and that it was like staring into the heart of creation itself. And Captain Martinez ordered all ships to battle stations before telling Jake and Maya they were cleared to launch when ready.